not just by our bodies, but by our thoughts, our concepts, our language. The neuroscientist Lisa Feldman Barrett has become very interested in this dynamic relationship between words and emotions. She argues that when we learn a new word for an emotion, new feelings are sure to follow. As a historian, I've long suspected that as language changes, our emotions do too. When we look to the past, it's easy to see that emotions have changed, sometimes very dramatically, in response to new cultural expectations and religious beliefs, new ideas about gender, ethnicity, and age, even in response to new political and economic ideologies. There is a historicity to emotions that we are only recently starting to understand. So I agree absolutely that it does us good to learn new words for emotions, but I think we need to go further. I think to be truly emotionally intelligent, we need to understand where those words have come from and what ideas about how we ought to live and behave they're smuggling along with them. Let me tell you a story. It begins in a garret in the late 17th century in the Swiss university town of Basel. Inside, there's a dedicated student living some 60 miles away from home. He stops turning up to his lectures, and his friends come to visit, and they find him dejected and feverish, having heart palpitations, strange sores breaking out on his body. The doctors are called, and they think it's so serious that prayers are said for him in the local church. And it's only really when they're preparing to return this young man home so that he can die that they realise what's going on. Because once they lift him onto the stretcher, his breathing becomes less laboured. And by the time he's got to the gates of his hometown, he's almost entirely recovered. And that's when they realise that he's been suffering from a very powerful form of homesickness. It's so powerful that it might have killed him. Well, in 1688, a young doctor, Johannes Hofer, heard of this case and others like it, and christened the illness nostalgia. The diagnosis quickly caught on in medical circles around Europe. The English actually thought they were probably immune because of all the travel that they did in the empire and so on, but soon there were cases cropping up in Britain too. The last person to die from nostalgia was an American soldier fighting during the First World War in France. How is it possible that you could die from nostalgia less than 100 years ago? But today, not only does the word mean something different, a sickening for a lost time rather than a lost place, but homesickness itself is seen as less serious, sort of downgraded from something you could die from to something you may be worried your kid might be suffering from as a sleepover. This change seems to have happened in the early 20th century. But why? Was it the invention of telephones or the expansion of the railways? Was it perhaps the coming of modernity with its celebration of restlessness and travel and progress that made sickening for the familiar seem rather unambitious? You and I inherit that massive transformation in values, and it's one reason why we might not feel homesickness today as acutely as we used to. It's important to understand that these large historical changes influence our emotions partly because they affect how we feel about how we feel. Today we celebrate happiness. Happiness is supposed to make us better workers and parents and partners. It's supposed to make us live longer. In the 16th century, sadness was thought to do most of those things. It's even possible to read self-help books from that period which tried to encourage sadness in readers by giving them lists of reasons to be disappointed. These self-help authors thought you could cultivate sadness as a skill, since being expert in it would make you more resilient when something bad did happen to you, as invariably it would. I think we could learn from this today. Feel sad today, and you might feel impatient, even a little ashamed. Feel sad in the 16th century, and you might feel a little bit smug. Of course, our emotions don't just change across time, they also change from place to place. The Baining people of Papua New Guinea speak of a wumbuk, a feeling of lethargy that descends when a houseguest finally leaves. Now, you or I might feel relief, but in Baining culture, departing guests are thought to shed a sort of heaviness so they can travel more easily, and this heaviness infects the air and causes this awumbuk. And so what they do is leave a bowl of water out overnight to absorb this air, and then very early the next morning they wake up and have a ceremony and throw the water away. Now here's a good example of spiritual practices and geographical realities combining to bring a distinct emotion into life and make it disappear again. One of my favourite emotions is a Japanese word, amai. Amai is a very common word in Japan, but it is actually quite hard to translate. It means something like the pleasure that you get when you're able to temporarily hand over responsibility for your life to someone else. Now, anthropologists suggest that one reason why this word might have been named and celebrated in Japan is because of that country's traditionally collectivist culture, whereas the feeling of dependency may be more fraught amongst English speakers who have learned to value self-sufficiency and individualism. This might be a little simplistic, but it is tantalizing. What might our emotional languages tell us not just about what we feel, but about what we value most? Most people who tell us to pay attention to our well-being talk of the importance of naming our emotions. But these names aren't neutral labels. They are freighted with our culture's values and expectations, and they transmit ideas about who we think we are. Learning new and unusual words for emotions will help attune us to the more finely grained aspects of our inner lives. But more than this, I think these words are worth caring about because they remind us how powerful the connection is between what we think and how we end up feeling. True emotional intelligence requires that we understand the social, the political, the cultural forces that have shaped what we've come to believe about our emotions, and understand how happiness or hatred or love or anger might still be changing now. Because if we want to measure our emotions and teach them in our schools and listen as our politicians tell us how important they are, then it is a good idea that we understand where the assumptions we have about them have come from and whether they still truly speak to us now. I want to end with an emotion I often feel when I'm working as a historian. It's a French word, dépaysement. It evokes the giddy disorientation that you feel in an unfamiliar place. One of my favourite parts of being a historian is when something I've completely taken for granted, some very familiar part of my life, is suddenly made strange again. Dépaysement is unsettling, but it's exciting too. And I hope you might be having just a little glimpse of it right now. Thank you.